White neighbor calls police over black boy's hair, then realizes her huge mistake. There is a neighborhood that believes in itself. You know the type. The lawns are trimmed on Saturdays. The driveways get sealed every 2 years. The homeowners association meets quarterly and keeps detailed minutes. The streets are named after trees, like Maple Court, Birchwood Lane, and Cedar Ridge Drive, though most of the trees were cut down when the subdivision was built in 1987. The neighborhood values order. It values routine. Above all, it believes the people living there are the right kind of people. Sycamore Glen was that kind of neighborhood. But before we dive into the story, please like and subscribe to the Golden Triumphant Stories channel if you love freedom and dislike injustice and prejudice. Your support encourages us to keep sharing these golden stories. We also want to know where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section. Sycamore Glen was located on the western edge of Rosewood, Georgia, a mid-sized city about 20 miles south of Atlanta. For the last 20 years, the city had been telling itself it had moved on from its past. New restaurants downtown, a revitalized arts district, and a diversity initiative at Jefferson County Public Schools were all part of this narrative. Sycamore Glen was built in 1987, and in the 37 years since, the neighborhood changed slowly and incompletely. Families came and went. The faces of some residents changed. Still, the homeowners association continued to meet quarterly. In the summer of a recent year, a family moved into 14 Cedar Ridge Drive. The Murphy family. Paul and Diana Murphy lived there with their 2 sons, Tobias and Elijah. The boys were 14 years old, identical twins who finished each other's sentences, debated the same topics, and moved through life with the easy confidence of young men raised to know exactly who they were. Neighbors came by with casseroles. The Hendersons from next door, the Garcias from across the street, and the older couple at the end of the block, the Williamses, who waved every morning without fail. By most accounts, the Murphy family's arrival was unremarkable. It was a typical beginning, like most beginnings, that gave no hint of what it would lead to. But on Cedar Ridge Drive, at number 22, lived Patricia Holt. And Patricia Holt was watching. Before we go further, it's important to understand something about Tobias and Elijah Murphy. Not what they looked like to Patricia Holt, but who they truly were. Tobias was the older twin by 11 minutes and never let Elijah forget it. He was quiet in the way that some intelligent people are, not shy but selective. He listened carefully before speaking and chose his words with precision. He wanted to be an architect. He had dreamed of it since he was 8 years old when his father took him to see the new federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. Standing in the atrium, looking up at its geometry, he said out loud, "Someone thought of this." His father smiled and replied, "Someone like you could think of things like this." Elijah, the younger twin by 11 minutes, was the louder one, though loud was relative in the Murphy household. Loud meant he laughed more and faster. He offered opinions without being asked. He moved through rooms with an extra energy that their mother, Diana, called presence and their father described as a lot. He wanted to make films and had been making short videos since he was 10, documenting ordinary life with his phone constantly in hand, capturing scenes that others might overlook. By all measures that count, they were good kids. They were also extraordinary. What truly set Tobias and Elijah Murphy apart? What made them stand out on every street they lived on? What caused their teachers to pause and classmates to take notice? Was their hair. It all began with their grandmother. Grandma Ruth, their father's mother, was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. She worked as a licensed cosmetologist for over 30 years and transformed hair in her shop on 5th Avenue North since before Paul Murphy was born. She began teaching the twins when they were 9, not just how to braid but how to think about it. Ruth grew up in Birmingham during the 1960s. As a little girl, she witnessed the civil rights movement and saw the world change from her mother's kitchen window. She understood from a young age that black identity, especially black hair, had always been contested ground in America. It had faced policing and legislation. It had been labeled unprofessional, unkempt, dangerous, and other words that had little to do with hair, but everything to do with power. She also understood the other side of that story, its beauty, the history behind it, the braiding traditions that black women carried through slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the Great Migration. Traditions that survived everything America threw at them because they were not just style, they were memories. They were identical. They were a statement that no law or institution could fully silence. Grandma Ruth showed the twins photographs from the Harlem Renaissance, the Civil Rights era, and from barbershops and beauty salons of Black America, places that served as community centers and sanctuaries for generations. She pointed out the geometric patterns in traditional African American braiding. She showed them how mathematics, symbolism, and beauty could coexist. She told them, "What you wear on your head is a sentence about who you are. Make it a good sentence." Tobias and Elijah embraced that lesson. By the time they were 14, their braided designs had become intricate works of art. They created geometric patterns influenced by Grandma Ruth's teachings, architectural forms inspired by buildings Tobias studied, and shapes Elijah calculated and transferred to their scalps. They styled each other's hair every 2 weeks, spending Saturday mornings in front of the bathroom mirror, working slowly and carefully like craftsmen. At Jefferson Middle School in Atlanta, where they lived before moving to Rosewood, classmates took photos of their hair with permission. Their history teacher asked them to present on the cultural tradition behind their designs, and the school newspaper featured them. Grandma Ruth drove up from Birmingham to watch them present. They grew up proud of their hair. This is the family that moved into 14 Cedar Ridge Drive on a Saturday in July. They were not a threat, a mystery, or something dangerous. They were 2 boys with extraordinary hair and a school project due in 3 weeks. This is who Patricia Holt was watching from her window. Patricia Holt was 58 years old. She was not a bad person. It's important to say this. The story of what happened on Cedar Ridge Drive is not about a monster. Monsters are easy to point to from a distance and say, "I would never." They let us off the hook. Patricia Holt was not a monster. She was something more ordinary and therefore more dangerous. She lived her entire life with assumptions so familiar that she no longer recognized them as assumptions. They had become simply the way things were for her. Born and raised in Rosewood, she attended Jefferson County schools, graduated from Georgia State, married a real estate attorney named David Holt, and moved into Sycamore Glen 22 years ago. She raised 2 children there, coached a little league team, and served on the Homeowners Association for 6 years. She attended First Methodist on Sundays. She considered herself a good person. But she had not thought carefully about what being good truly meant. When the Murphy family moved in, she told herself she was just being watchful, a good neighbor, the kind of person who paid attention to her community. The word she used, during a quiet conversation with her friend Sandra from the HOA while standing in Sandra's driveway 2 weeks after the Murphys arrived, was suspicious. She said the boys looked suspicious. She said their hair looked suspicious. Gang-related, she indicated, was the phrase she used. She spoke quietly, as people do when they feel they shouldn't say something but can't help themselves. Sandra looked at her for a moment. Sandra had a nephew who was black, 17, and wore his hair in braids. Patricia's words made her feel something shift in her chest. She quickly changed the topic. Patricia Holt convinced herself she was just being careful. On a Thursday afternoon in August, 3 weeks after the Murphy family had moved in, Patricia Holt stood at her window. She had spent a lot of time there since July, when she saw something that made her grab her phone. 2 boys were on the sidewalk. One was filming with a phone. The other was talking, gesturing, pointing at his own hair. They were laughing. Patricia Holt didn't see 2 boys laughing. She saw what her assumptions trained her to see. She dialed 911. The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She reported suspicious activity. She mentioned 2 young men outside on the sidewalk who looked like they were casing the neighborhood. She said she didn't recognize them. She noted they were filming, and she emphasized filming as if pointing a phone camera at the sidewalk was evidence. The dispatcher, a woman named Keisha Jordan, a 12-year veteran of the Rosewood 911 Center who had heard thousands of calls, asked her questions. Was there a weapon? Patricia Holt said no. Was there a physical fight? Patricia Holt said no. Had any property been damaged? Patricia Holt said no. The dispatcher then asked what specifically made her think there was suspicious activity. Patricia Holt answered, "They just don't look right." For words. They just don't look right. Keisha Jordan noted it down. She had written variations of those 4 words countless times. She dispatched 2 patrol units to Cedar Ridge Drive. On the sidewalk outside number 14, Tobias and Elijah Murphy were on their 7th take. Elijah was dissatisfied with his explanation of the interlocking diamond pattern on Tobias's left side, a design they developed together the previous Saturday, inspired by the geometric quilts of the G's Bend quilters of Alabama, which Grandma Ruth had shown them in a book she kept in her shop. Tobias, the older twin, suggested Elijah stop overthinking it and just talk naturally. Elijah argued that naturally was the problem, that the history deserved precision. They argued in the familiar and almost musical way of twins who had been discussing the same things since they learned to talk. They didn't hear the cars approaching. They were laughing too loudly. They turned when they saw the first patrol car pull up to the curb. The laughter stopped. There are moments that change a person. Not the big obvious ones, the graduations, the first days, the losses you can see coming. The small sudden moments. The ones that arrive without warning and settle somewhere permanent, somewhere unreachable and irretrievable. For Tobias Murphy, the moment two Rosewood Police Department cruisers pulled up outside his house on a Thursday afternoon in August, 3 weeks after his family moved in, was one of those moments. He was 14 years old. He had done nothing wrong. He stood very still. Beside him, Elijah was still too, Elijah, who was never still, whose energy was a constant presence in every room he entered. He was completely motionless. His phone remained in his hand, still recording, though neither of them made that choice. It just hadn't been put away. Later, this would matter a lot. For officers got out, 2 from each cruiser. They wore the navy blue of the Rosewood PD and moved with the purpose of people trained to project calm. The lead officer was Sergeant Dave Kowalski, 13 years on the force, born and raised in Rosewood, a father of 2 boys, ages 7 and 9. He stopped a few feet from the twins and looked at them both. He asked what they were doing. Tobias answered. His voice was steady, the steadiness Grandma Ruth had taught them, the steadiness his father had described in conversations Tobias hadn't known he was absorbing until this moment. He said they were filming a school project, a cultural history presentation on African-American braiding traditions. He noted he was the subject, and Elijah was the cameraman. Sergeant Kowalski looked at Elijah's phone. He asked where they lived. Tobias pointed to number 14. Kowalski looked at the house, then back at the boys. He asked how long they had lived there. 3 weeks, Tobias said. Kowalski told them to stay put. He said he needed to speak with a parent or guardian. He said it with the neutrality of a man following a protocol triggered by a phone call, doing his job, while also being aware that 2 boys doing homework on the sidewalk in front of their own house on a Thursday afternoon didn't represent an emergency. But the cars were there. The lights were still flashing on the second unit. Neighbors were stepping onto their porches. Mr. Henderson from next door stood in his driveway with a garden hose in his hand, not watering anything, just watching. Tobias and Elijah Murphy stood on the sidewalk in front of their home. And they waited. Inside Sergeant Kowalski's cruiser, his partner, Officer Maria Santos, who had been on the force for 4 years, ran the address through the system. She read what came back. She read it again. She looked up through the windshield at the 2 boys on the sidewalk, the extraordinary designs in their hair, the phone Elijah was still holding, and the house behind them with a Georgia State University decal on the rear window of the car parked in the driveway. She quietly said to Kowalski, "You need to see this." Kowalski walked back to the car. He looked at the screen. He was silent for a moment. Then a dark blue sedan turned onto Cedar Ridge Drive. The car moved at a normal speed. It turned into the driveway of number 14, as if a man were arriving home at the end of a long workday. The engine turned off and the door opened. The man who stepped out was wearing a suit. Not a casual suit. A dark, precisely fitted charcoal suit. The kind that carries the weight of courtrooms, of long days behind a bench, of 21 years in the Georgia judicial system. His tie was a deep navy. His shoes were polished. He reached back into the car for a leather briefcase. He straightened and looked toward the street. He first saw the patrol cars. Then he saw his sons. What crossed Paul Murphy's face was not panic or explosive anger. It was a more controlled and devastating expression. The specific look of a black father in America who had spent 14 years preparing his sons for this possibility, arriving home to find that their preparations were not just theoretical. This was real. It was happening on his street, in front of his house, on a Thursday afternoon. He walked toward them, unhurried, deliberate. Sergeant Kowalski turned and watched him approach. He took in the suit, the briefcase, and the measured pace. Something shifted in the sergeant's posture, a slight, involuntary adjustment. The man stopped beside his sons. He placed one hand briefly on Tobias's shoulder. Not a dramatic gesture, barely more than a touch. But Tobias felt it settle through him like something he had been waiting for without knowing. Paul Murphy looked at Sergeant Kowalski. He said, "Good afternoon. Can you explain what's happening here?" His voice was the same one he used in court. Not raised. Not hostile. The voice of a man who had spent 21 years asking questions in rooms where every answer had a consequence. Kowalski cleared his throat. He said they had received a call about suspicious activity in the area. He said the boys had been cooperative and had explained they were working on a school project. He said they were in the process of verifying the information. Paul Murphy looked at his sons. Elijah held up his phone and turned it toward his father. The screen showed the project, the video they had been building, Tobias's voice explaining the history of the design in his hair, the photographs of Grandma Ruth's shop in Birmingham, the timeline of braiding traditions in Black America, going back through the Harlem Renaissance, back through Reconstruction, back further. Paul Murphy watched it for a moment. He looked at Kowalski and asked, in the same measured tone, "Who made the call?" The sergeant hesitated. Across the street, the door of number 22 opened. Patricia Holt stepped outside. She had come outside with the posture of a woman who believed she was the reasonable party. She had made a responsible call. She had seen something that didn't look right. She had done what a good neighbor does. She was prepared to explain this calmly. She was halfway across Cedar Ridge Drive when the man in the suit turned to look at her. She stopped. She had seen this face before. Not on Cedar Ridge Drive. Not in this neighborhood. In the Rosewood Gazette. In the Georgia Bar Association newsletter her husband still received by mail. In the framed article on the wall of the lobby of the Jefferson County Courthouse, where she had once gone to resolve a property dispute 5 years ago and had walked past a photograph without stopping to look at it. The Honorable Paul J. Murphy, Chief Judge of the Jefferson County Superior Court, the presiding judge of the most consequential courtroom in the county, the man who had been appointed by the governor of Georgia, the man whose rulings on civil rights cases had been cited in courts across the Southeast, the man the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had profiled 2 years ago under the headline, "The most important judge you've never heard of." She had called the police on his children. She had called the police on the chief judge's children. She had called the police on 2 boys who were doing their homework on the sidewalk in front of their own house. The blood left Patricia Holt's face. Her hands, which had been folded in front of her in the posture of a woman prepared to defend her position, dropped to her sides. She stood in the middle of Cedar Ridge Drive. The officers were watching her. The Hendersons and the Garcias and the Williamses and half a dozen other neighbors who had stepped outside were watching her. Tobias and Elijah Murphy were watching her. And Judge Paul Murphy was watching her with the expression of a man who was choosing, in real time, what kind of person he was going to be in this moment. He chose. He did not raise his voice. Not once. Not even slightly. This, the neighbors would say afterward, was the thing that stayed with them. Not just what he said, though what he said would stay with them too, would travel through text messages and dinner tables and quiet conversations for a long time. The thing they remembered first was that he never raised his voice. He asked Patricia Holt to come closer. She crossed the street. She stopped a few feet in front of him. She could not look at the boys. She tried once and could not hold it. Judge Paul Murphy looked at her for a moment without speaking. He had the patience of a man who understood that silence, properly held, tells you more about a person than anything they say. Then he spoke. He said, "I want to say something to you. Not to humiliate you in front of your neighbors. Not to make this harder than it already is. But because my sons are standing here. And I need them to hear me say it." He said, "When you looked out your window today, you did not see what was there. What was there were 2 14-year-old boys making a school project on the sidewalk in front of their own home. What you saw was something you brought with you to the window. A picture. An assumption. A conclusion you had already reached before you had a single fact. And that assumption, that picture, had nothing to do with Tobias and Elijah. It had everything to do with you." Patricia Holt was looking at the pavement. He said, "I am not here to tell you that you are evil. I don't know you well enough to say that. But I am going to tell you what happened here today. My sons are black boys in America. They know what that means. Diana and I have raised them to know what that means, because we have to, because this country requires it of us. And today, on a Thursday afternoon in August, 3 weeks after we moved into this neighborhood, they were standing outside their own home with 4 police officers asking them questions. Because of what you decided their hair meant." He paused. He let that sit in the air. He said, The designs in their hair that you called gang-related? My mother taught them how to do that. Her name is Ruth Murphy. She has run a hair salon in Birmingham, Alabama for 31 years. She grew up in this state during the civil rights movement. She learned those braiding patterns from her mother, who learned them from her mother before her. Those geometric designs are part of a tradition that Black Americans have carried through every hard chapter of this country's history. My sons have been learning that tradition since they were 9 years old, because they understand that where you come from matters. They made it a school project because they want to share it, because they are proud of it. He looked at her steadily. He said, "Assumptions are not harmless. They do not stay inside the head where they are formed. They pick up a phone. They call 911. They put 4 squad cars on a street. They put 2 14-year-old boys in a situation that no child should have to navigate in front of their own home. You are looking at what your assumption did today." He turned to his sons. He looked at Tobias. At the composure that boy had held for the past 40 minutes on the sidewalk in front of his own house, at the steadiness that had cost something to maintain, at the face of a young man who was going to carry this afternoon somewhere inside him for a very long time. He looked at Elijah. At the stillness, the uncharacteristic, effortful stillness, of a boy who laughed faster than anyone and had not laughed once in 40 minutes, who was holding himself together with everything he had. He said, "Finish your project. Grandma Ruth would be proud of those designs. I am proud of those designs. I am proud of you both." Tobias exhaled. Something in Elijah's face broke open and then settled into something resolved. Something that was going to take years to fully name, but that had just been handed its first word. Sergeant Kowalski stepped forward. He said, "Your Honor, I want to apologize for." Judge Murphy held up one hand. Quietly. He said, "You responded to a call. You conducted yourself professionally. I have no issue with you today." He looked at Patricia Holt one final time. He said, "I hope you think about this." She did not speak. There was nothing to say. Before he walked his sons inside, Judge Paul Murphy turned back to face Cedar Ridge Drive. The neighbors were still there. On their lawns. In their driveways. Some who had come outside when the patrol cars arrived and had stayed because something was happening that they understood mattered. That named something, that put language to a discomfort that had been living in the space between people on this street without anyone being willing to call it by its name. He looked at all of them. He said, and he said it at the volume of a man who did not need to project because the street was completely silent and everyone was listening. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a neighborhood is not what people are doing. It is what others assume. He went inside. The door closed. Sergeant Kowalski sat in his cruiser for a moment before starting the engine. He was thinking about the words. He would think about them that night, lying awake. He would think about them the following week, when he was called to another neighborhood for another suspicious activity report. He would think about the difference between a call about something happening and a call about someone looking. Officer Maria Santos wrote something in her notepad. She did not show it to anyone. It was for herself. The neighbors dispersed the way people disperse after something true has been said in a public place. Slowly, thoughtfully, not quite ready to go back inside and be ordinary again. Patricia Holt walked back across the street. She went inside her house in the same white colonial at number 22 where she had lived for 22 years. She closed the door. She stood in her front hallway. She did not move for a long time. She was thinking about the call. The 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The words she had said to the dispatcher. The word suspicious. The phrase gang-related. The sentence, "They just don't look right." She was thinking about what look right had meant. Whose face had been in her mind when she decided these boys did not match it. She was thinking about how long that picture had been there, how it had gotten there, how many times it had guided a decision she had never examined. She was thinking about Ruth Murphy in Birmingham, 31 years in a shop, learning from her mother, who learned from her mother. A tradition carried through everything America had done to try to take it away. She was thinking about what she had called it. She sat down on the bottom stair in her hallway, and she did not move for a very long time. 3 weeks later, Tobias and Elijah Murphy presented their school project at Rosewood High School. The project was titled, Written in Hair, The History and Identity of Black Braiding in America. It was 24 minutes long. Elijah had re-edited it 8 times after the incident on Cedar Ridge Drive. He had not told anyone he was re-editing it, not his parents, not his brother, until the 6th version when he asked Tobias to record a new opening. The new opening was Tobias, sitting in a chair in their bedroom in Rosewood, facing the camera, in his school clothes. The latest design in his hair was their most complex work yet, a pattern they had developed the Saturday after the incident, working in the bathroom mirror for 4 hours without speaking much, the way they sometimes worked when something had happened that was too big for words and needed to be put somewhere. Tobias looked at the camera. He said, "My grandmother taught me that hair has always been a language. She taught me that Black Americans have been speaking that language for centuries. Through slavery, through Jim Crow, through laws that tried to tell us our natural hair was unprofessional, was inappropriate, was something to be ashamed of, through every attempt to make us smaller. We kept speaking it." He paused. He said, "This presentation is about what my hair actually says." The classroom went quiet when it ended. Their teacher, Mr. Raymond Brooks, a Black man in his 40s who had been teaching American history at Rosewood High for 16 years and who had learned, over those 16 years, to keep his expression neutral when students surprised him, looked at Tobias and Elijah Murphy for a long moment. Then he said, "Gentlemen, this is the finest student work I have seen in this classroom in a decade, possibly longer." The project was selected for the school's Cultural Heritage Showcase. Then it was entered in the Jefferson County Student Competition, where it won first place. Then, because Dr. Angela Moore, the head of the Rosewood Community Arts Foundation, had been in the audience at the county competition and had made a phone call, it was screened at the foundation's annual community celebration at the Rosewood Civic Center. Grandma Ruth drove up from Birmingham. She wore her Sunday dress. She sat in the third row. She watched the entire 24 minutes without moving. When it was over, she stood up, slowly, because her knees had been giving her trouble, and because she had the dignity of a woman who stood slowly on purpose when the moment deserved it. She looked at her grandsons, who were standing at the front of the room waiting for her face. She said, "I gave you the tradition. You gave it somewhere to go." Elijah cried. He had not cried on Cedar Ridge Drive. He had held everything, all of it, the officers and the questions and the 40 minutes on the sidewalk and his father's words and the face of the woman who had made the call. He had held it with both hands through all of it. But in that civic center in Rosewood, Georgia, with his grandmother standing in the third row saying those words, the holding finished. Tobias put his arm around him. The room gave them a long, warm, full-hearted applause. The kind that doesn't stop quickly. The kind that means something. And in the back of the room, standing just inside the door that had been left open to the evening air, having driven to the Rosewood Civic Center, having parked her car, having sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes before going inside, was a woman in a blue cardigan. Patricia Holt. She did not approach the Murphy family. She did not introduce herself. She did not perform a redemption she had not yet earned. She watched the presentation. She watched Grandma Ruth stand. She watched Elijah cry and Tobias hold him, and the room refused to stop applauding. She watched what she had almost destroyed. She left before the lights came up. She drove home on the surface streets instead of the highway, taking the long way through downtown Rosewood, past the Jefferson County Courthouse, where a photograph of the Honorable Paul J. Murphy hung in the lobby. She did not go to the Homeowners Association meeting that month. She did not stand at her window. She called Sandra and told her, haltingly, imprecisely, without being able to say it as clearly as it needed to be said, what she had been sitting with. Sandra listened. Sandra said, "I know. I saw his face." She said, "Do the work, Patricia. That's all. Just do the work. That work does not have a clean ending. It was not supposed to. It is the kind of work that does not finish. It only deepens." A year after the incident on Cedar Ridge Drive, Sycamore Glen looked the same. The lawns were edged on Saturdays. The driveways were sealed. The Homeowners Association met quarterly. The streets were still named after trees that had been cleared 37 years ago. But something had shifted. In the small, invisible, atmospheric way that things shift in a place after something true has been said in it out loud. The Henderson family had started stopping by number 14, not with casseroles, but with conversations. Real ones, the kind where you listen at least as much as you talk. The Garcias had asked Elijah about film school. The Williamses from the end of the block had started pausing their morning wave to make it longer, more deliberate, the wave of people who have decided to mean it. Sergeant Kowalski had requested a department training session on bias in policing. He had filled out the form himself. He had listed what he had observed on Cedar Ridge Drive as the reason. Officer Maria Santos had posted something about the incident, carefully, without naming anyone, on a community forum for law enforcement officers. It had generated a conversation that was still going 11 months later. And at number 14 Cedar Ridge Drive, on a Saturday morning every 2 weeks, the curtains on the upstairs bathroom window were open and the light inside was warm. And if you walked past at the right time on the right morning, you could hear, faintly through the screen, the sound of two brothers arguing. About a pattern, about the geometry, about the history, the language. They were still making it. They had never stopped. Because here is the thing about Tobias and Elijah Murphy. The thing that couldn't be seen from a window, the thing that 4 officers on a suburban street had not immediately known, the thing that a neighborhood had needed a moment of hard truth to understand. They were not suspicious. They were not gang-related. They were not a threat. They were 2 boys who had been taught by their grandmother, a woman who grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, during the Civil Rights Movement, who ran a salon on 5th Avenue North for 31 years, who learned from her mother and her mother's mother, that what you wear on your head is a sentence about who you are. And they were making sure it was a good one. That is who they were on the day the police came. That is who they have always been. That is who they will always be. And the neighborhood, slowly, incompletely, the way American neighborhoods change when people decide to actually see each other, was beginning to understand that. Some lessons arrived too late. Some arrived just in time. And some, the ones worth keeping, the ones worth carrying, arrive in the form of 2 boys on a sidewalk in Rosewood, Georgia, laughing, holding a phone, telling the world, "This is where I come from. This is what I value. This is who I am."